When in doubt, whatever the situation is, we're speaking to parents here. When in doubt, get in the water. Take your kid and get in the water. Whatever it is, whatever's coming at you, you won't regret it. You'll come back happier, healthier, more connected to your kid, smiling, most likely. Never heard anybody say, yeah, I went to the beach and I came back and man, I was extra sad. Nobody regrets practicing Blue Mind.
Welcome to the show. Thank you for taking the time today and coming on.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Tyler. Looking forward to this conversation for a while now.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I know I hounded you emails, and I think my wife even might have sent you a message on social media to come at it from all angles. But it's been a dream of mine to connect with you ever since I read your book like 5 years ago, which I'll get into that story. So it's really appreciated making the time.
Mm.
So, to share a little bit about how I came across your work. So, my wife and I grew up both near the beach. We are both from like South Jersey area, and I kind of always took it for granted. Never really realized how amazing it was until we moved away. We moved to Denver, Colorado, and we thought that was our forever home, like without a doubt. If you know anybody that knew us personally, they'll tell you the same thing. And we went there. We were there for a couple years and felt like something was missing and didn't really know what it was. And then we kind of more and more started really craving the ocean. We took a couple trips. We went down to Costa Rica and we were like, wow, I really think it's the ocean. I really think we need to be near the ocean. So we ended up deciding to move to San Diego. And before we left, I had this feeling about knowing being near water was really important. So I found your book. I read it and completely validated everything that I was thinking and changed my life. And honestly, since I read your book, I prioritize every single day being in, near, around some version of water. And yeah, it's like I said, it's absolutely changed my life. I know it's probably changed so many other people's lives that have come across it. So appreciate your work and appreciate what you've done there. And yeah, I got it here next to me right now. I got my blue marble that I take everywhere too. So
That's
I
sweet.
appreciate it.
That's awesome. That's so good to hear. And you write a book and then you hope it's useful to people, and it's nice to hear it. Nice to hear people speak up and in such a personal way. And then also to be invited on your podcast is an honor. So full circle, I think there.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Never would have thought would have came to this and chatting with you here, but life's funny how it works, so. So if you wouldn't mind starting off and just sharing a bit about your best-selling book and what really inspired you to write such a groundbreaking book, because I know that was the one thing when trying to find it myself too, was there's not really anything like Blue Mind and about the things that you write about. So if you wouldn't mind sharing about that for listeners as starting off point, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, the title of the book I wrote is Blue Mind, and it was really just, those are two words that describe a concept, a theory that I think we're all kind of familiar with. It's an ancient idea, in fact, that water has emotional valence for us. And I'm a marine biologist, and I became a marine biologist mostly because I loved that feeling. I didn't have a name for it. I just knew I needed it and wanted to align my life with that feeling, my career, my education. And so I was chugging along as a marine biologist and studying sea turtles and all the trouble they get into and doing my best to help them, publishing papers, advising grad students. And I always kind of came back to what's the science behind that feeling that has basically guided my life since I was a kid. And I went looking for a book about it because I thought some smart neuroscientist probably wrote a book about your brain on water, like a book that I love called Musicophilia about your brain on music, or neuroplasticity. There are books about how the mind and the brain change, the psychology of happiness. I thought there's got to be a book that I could then apply to my work for the ocean as just another tool. So I went looking for a book to read about that feeling, and I couldn't find the book I wanted to read. And I kept looking and I thought, oh, maybe it's hiding, or maybe it's out of print, or maybe it's in another language. And nope, the book I wanted to read didn't exist. So I tried to get other people to write it so that I could read it. And I did not succeed, and ended up pitching the idea to one of my favorite people the late great neurologist, Dr. Oliver Sacks, who's written, you should read all of his books, basically. That's my advice. But he said, it's a fine idea. You do it. So that's how it started. I wanted to read a book, not write one. And it ended up basically landing in my lap to write it first so that I could read it. So 5 years later, I brought him a copy, hardcover, first edition copy of Blue Mind, and brought it to his office in New York. And that's how it started. But the idea is a simple ancient idea that water does have these emotional wellness benefits that do all kinds of good things for us, that connects us to each other, builds our empathy, boosts our creativity, it calms us down. Sometimes it can help you feel more courageous when you need it, builds your confidence. And that's the basic thesis, the wellness benefits of water in all of its forms. So it's ocean, lakes, rivers, snow, ice, steam, clouds, fog, all of the forms. And it turns out it's a really useful idea when we put it in the hands of creative people, to help heal each other, help heal those who need it most, help us be better parents. So case in point, making decisions, creative decisions, getting unstuck, whatever you get stuck in, just such a powerful concept. And so since I wrote the book, I've been spending my time kind of extending the idea, sharing it with those who can put it to good use. And that's been just a wonderful way to live, a wonderful new facet to my career as a marine biologist.
Yeah, and I think I had heard it in one of your talks that you had given about the initial thought and how you had said that a book on water, writing about the benefits of water, maybe it's going to be a paragraph or a magazine article or whatever it might be, but then you read this book and you realize how deep you could go, and I'm sure you probably could have, when writing it, gone even deeper with certain topics. But there's so many facets of water, and it's so cool too in the book how you really took the many forms of water and how they could benefit and just like the different styles of how people do it. And it's so beautifully done. And yeah, I mean, just absolutely one of my favorite books. I'll read it over and over
Right.
again.
Oh, that's excellent. That's excellent. And, I think you're right. We're made mostly of water. That's just a fact. Our planet's mostly covered with water. That's a fact. All life depends on water. So when you think about this intersection between, our nervous system, our mind, and the single most important defining feature of our planet, the water, it's so multifaceted and complex and interesting that, yeah, you could spend many lifetimes exploring how that all works. And then if you take a few steps back from sort of modern neuropsychology and think of human history, every culture talks about this idea. Every sacred text, every spiritual tradition, every bit of humanity understand this in some form. And it's codified in books and poetry and songs, in tradition. So it's not a new idea, but it has kind of been lost and forgotten in the last 100 years or so. We have forgotten about our relationship with nature and water in particular, and the wellness and healing benefits. And the research is really clear, that it works. So the job now is having conversations like this and the dissemination of this concept, getting it into the hands of people who can do a lot with it, and whether it's in their own lives or helping others who need it, raising kids who understand the role of water. If you're on this planet, you should understand this concept. Maybe the audacious goal here is that Blue Mind becomes common knowledge and common practice for 8 billion people. It's a big project, but we're well on our way to achieving it. And if we get there, it transforms public health. We get healthier if we understand and practice Blue Mind, and so do the waters. We get this new reason to protect and restore the lakes, the rivers, the oceans, the groundwaters. That's a pretty good deal. If we can pull that off, it's a big deal, and it's a good deal. So that's how I'm spending the rest of my days, basically. The clarity is refreshing. Knowing your purpose and aligning your life to it is such a gift. And so that's the background kind of to it.
I love it. Yeah, it's a large scale change for how we perceive our environment is absolutely needed now more than ever. I mean, it's been needed for many years, but kudos to you for taking the initiative to spend so much time really putting together such a masterpiece and then dedicating the rest of your life to it is really, really inspiring. And yeah, I'm right there with you. And hopefully those 8 billion people could jump on board too with us.
Right on.
Well, I know you touched on a little bit about some of the benefits, but I mean, there are so many physical, emotional, spiritual, but if you could touch on what you consider some of the most important benefits for being in water for human beings in general, just so listeners could kind of have an idea of some of the things that you dive further into in your book.
Yeah, I think the best way to really to understand blue mind is to start with what we refer to as red mind, which is our kind of overstimulated, maybe distracted, anxious, normal. It's kind of, maybe it's abnormal to be that way, but it's become normalized. I call it red space. So you're in screens a lot. There's signs, there's a cacophony of incoming audio signals. So we're in a really wonderful, incredible, information rich world now. And it's exhausting and it's distracting and it's anxiety causing, particularly for young people who don't know what it was like before all this stuff. And to understand blue mind, let's start with red mind. And red mind is very useful. It helps us strive and thrive even and compete and reach goals and grind. But when you start feeling tired and you just recaffeinate and sleep less and work harder, you will burn out. 100% guaranteed. Like, you might be super fit and super resilient, but I promise you, even superheroes burn out. And none of us are superheroes. So that's gray mind. And while red mind is useful, and you could even say it's very good for us to have access to, gray mind is pretty pointless, except it's your body and your mind saying, we're out of here. We're done. We're toast. We're shutting down. And if you've ever been there, it can hit you like a ton of bricks, and burnout is not something you want to shoot for. So let's go back to blue mind. Blue mind is like taking your foot off the gas, taking a step back, hitting the reset, the refresh, the restoration. And water is one of the best ways to do that in all of its forms, as you mentioned, including, you know, images of water, artworks, songs about water, metaphorical representation, photography, all of the representations of water in nature. And I use the word water, and really we can extend that to include plants and animals that are mostly made out of water. So embodied water is one of the forms. So green meadow or a lush forest or a sea turtle, they're all made of water too. So I'm pretty ecumenical when I say the word water. It kind of is kind of an all inclusive term for nature and depictions thereof. And so what happens when we take those blue mind breaks? Well, our bodies and our minds get a reset, really, literally. I mean, it's neurologically, our field of view of the information coming in visually is simplified when you're at the water, when you're at the beach or the lake or a pool even. Auditorily, the information is simplified. So you're not processing language and images. You're getting a visual and an auditory break. And then when you're in the water, you get this somatic break. You kind of don't worry about gravity as much. If you're wearing fewer clothing, you feel more free. And people describe it as a water hug. And we know that hugs are good for us emotionally, physically, socially. And when you feel that hug from a water, from your body of water, you get those benefits as well. So we can go on and list 100 kind of emotional wellness benefits. But I think the most interesting thing is when you pause and think for yourself, what are the benefits that water has given you throughout your life? That's the list that's going to resonate the most. Some guy talking on a podcast spouting off, the science is fine, but when you reflect on, like you did right at the beginning, your story is the most powerful story of Blue Mind for you and your family, as mine is, as all of our listeners here would be as well. So I like to ask people, what's your water? What's the water you love, that you long for? What's its name? Who took you there? How did you feel when you first met that water and fell in love with it? How does it feel now? What has it given you? And that's a very personal conversation, but a super cool one to have with, you know, people you just met or people you know well, or colleagues or family members. And it helps to build that perceived value for that water. And everybody's got a story there. I've asked thousands of people, "What's your water?" And I've heard thousands of stories, and nobody has ever said, "Hmm, I don't have a water," or "I don't know." They might take a minute to really reflect and then bust out with this amazing story about their water. And it could be a creek, that ran through their town, or it could be a swimming pool, could be their bathtub. But that emotional connection is quite real, and quite an ancient concept. And so we continue to study the clinical research and applications of Blue Mind, whether it's through surf therapy or float therapy or all the other kinds of ways people engage. And all of the research points in the same direction. Like, hell yes, this basically the direction. None of it has said, nah, it doesn't work, or it's a bad idea. I mean, for the past decade, very consistently subtle or profound or somewhere in between benefits. Yeah.
It's endless, and there's so many, like you said, personal stories behind it that mean so much, and that emotional connection is just so important, and it's going to lead to so many physical and spiritual benefits too. But yeah, it is really exciting to also see now the research behind it. Myself too, as an occupational therapist, I had experience where I would work constantly in a clinic in the red mind state, where very overwhelming, lots of colors. And I mean, if I'm feeling that way, if I'm feeling locked in, there's no natural sunlight, there's no access to any type of nature in any sense, just padded rooms and toys and overstimulation, then can't even imagine how kids are feeling too. And I had the absolute pleasure of being able to transition my setting and be able to take children outdoors. And I had my aquatic therapy where I had went into like a pool and treated children, and like worked on all different types of stuff on like surfboards and on farms and all things. And not only is just getting out in nature so effective, but the aquatic therapy too in the pool, like you just saw the smile, like the second kids would see this water, whether they're on the spectrum, whether they're typically functioning and we're focusing on just physical deficits, whatever it might be, like unbelievable to just look at them and see. And it's hard to put to words, it's hard to put to research, but in their eyes, like the lighting up. And I mean, that's how we all feel as adults too. So yeah, just so cool to see. And the science could go on for days about the benefits, but I really appreciate that perspective too of like, well, how do you feel? And that's really all the answer people need.
Mhm. Yeah, and we do want the research to be rigorous and useful and back it up, and especially if there's a formal healthcare component and insurance companies and people are working. It's your job, right? So you don't you want what you do to be have a high level of efficacy and really work, rather than just you know, an eyeball rolling kinda thing. And, we can say without hesitation, both from the anecdotal experience, but also from the clinical laboratory work, that it works, and, if people are into that side of the conversation, go on to Google Scholar and plug in the words Blue Mind, Blue Health, aquatic therapy, float therapy, any of these terminologies that we're talking about, and just read the literature. Pretty impressive. And of course, all of the studies say we need more studies, because that's what researchers do. They like to make sure they have, job security. And so that's cool too for those who study it. It's just a great job to study Blue Mind. and as an academic, if that's your thing. I've kind of pivoted more to the cheerleading side of things or to the advocacy side of things and to the practice, helping people integrate these ideas into their work, into their lives, into their business, because I think it's so widely applicable. And if we're going to reach 8 billion people, that's part of the game too, while the research chugs along. But your insights working with kids and moving from sort of the windowless, kind of built environment to blue space, which is nature and all of its forms, water-based nature. You see it, like you see it in individual children, you see it in adults. Some of the stories that really explode my heart the most are when parents who have kids that are going through therapies for different reasons, when they say, "My child smiles in the water," and they don't otherwise smile. That's such a gift for a parent. Imagine raising a kid who's in pain, chronic pain, and they're not smiling much. And then imagine seeing them underwater, a little video of them swimming underwater with the biggest smile on their face that you've ever seen. Like, if you're a mom or a dad and that's your kid, that's just amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that changes everything and changes really directions of careers and everything that you want to focus on when you have little moments like that. It's life changing and groundbreaking for sure. I would love for you to touch a little bit too on in your personal life. How has Blue Mind been important? When have there been times where you might have been removed from a body of water or what you're so used to for a period of time? And how has that affected you, your internal state, your physical health, whatever it might have been? And I definitely can relate to it too. Obviously, like I said, living in Denver, not that there's not expanse of nature in Colorado. It's an absolutely beautiful place, but being in the water and being able to get out and paddle out and surf for me is a game changer. If I don't go for 3 or 4 days at a time, I literally feel like the internal shift and I'm just have some type of tension inside and more of that monkey mind. And then I go out and physically, emotionally, spiritually, I come out and completely changed. And it lasts for, as long as until I go out next. And I just have to make it a practice. And that's why I absolutely have. But I'd be really interested to hear your story and, times that you've been able to utilize it or not utilize it and how it's personally affected you.
Yeah, I wrote this book about this idea and I still need to be reminded to practice it. So if you feel like you're are also like that, you're in good company. We all need reminders to do the thing that's just so obviously good for us all the time, daily, really. I get head down in my work and I forget to eat and I forget to get in the water and I forget to do blue mind stuff. And then I feel it, and, my wife will remind me like, "Hey, let's take a swim. You should head to the beach. You got to get out." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're right." And so like you wrote the damn book, you need to do it. But we've been through some heavy stuff during the pandemic. We lost everything in a wildfire and had to kind of quietly absorb that loss because nobody wanted to hear about it because everybody was going through uncertainty and loss and confusion. So at a different time, maybe we would have had more community support or empathy, but we just kind of absorbed it. And that took its toll. That's the most red-minded period of, I think, my life. Simultaneously, my biological mother was dealing with dementia and passed. And so it was just super heavy. And I have to say, I don't know I'd be sitting here having this conversation if I didn't lean more heavily on the water that I had available, therapeutically, just to keep my head, on my shoulders and be a leader for my family, and help my kids deal with the loss and help them navigate the confusion of lockdown and college and losing grandma. And so, I've put it to the test. And I can't even remember, people didn't say it this way, but there was kind of like, okay, blue mind guy, let's see if your theory holds up for yourself, because through the shit show that you're dealing with. And not saying it was smooth sailing by any means, and it still continues to be a challenge internally, but getting to the water, trying to do it daily in some form certainly has helped. It's helped my kids. I know the conversation that they've been hearing their whole lives about dad talks about blue mind a lot. I give out these blue marbles. They're, rolling around the car, rolling around the house, but it's built into their DNA kind of, and wired into their brains because they've heard about it so much and they just naturally make those choices if they're feeling, that they need a rest or they're feeling like they're gonna burn out. They leave their phone behind and they go to the ocean or the lake or go for a swim or a cold plunge or whatever it is. And, so I feel like that's one of the best things you can give your kid is that understanding, that love of water. If they get it and they practice it and they know how to do that, they'll be okay through the crazy thing called life. So if I'm a personal and as a parent of two grown kids, 19 and 22 now, two daughters, I think that's my main advice, music and water. If you can instill a deep appreciation for music and water, your kid will be rich, like in non-monetary ways, just live a rich life. And interestingly, if you take that book that Oliver Sacks wrote about your brain on music and you just do a complete replace of the word music with water, the book actually almost makes sense. It's so similar in so many ways and all the different forms of music, all the different forms of water, how it can bring you up, it can settle you down, it can make you excited and energetic and invigorated, but it can also calm you. It's a place to go to grieve and mourn and to celebrate and to boost your creativity, to connect you more deeply with the people you love. So music and water both modulate kind of, and sometimes both at the same time is lovely. So that's, yeah, I would say I use music probably not as much as water, but still music's a big part of my life as well. So that's, yeah, I think that if I'm leaving any kind of parenting advice on the table, those would be the two bits right there.
I love that. I want to definitely circle back
Mhm.
to the benefits of water as well, like for children. But yeah, thank you for sharing that story. And you, tough times bring the most beautiful things. And what a experience to be able to experience stuff like that and put your own work and practicing what you're preaching to the test. And I'm sure it was so inspiring also for your kids to see you putting that into practice, and now they're going to take that into the rest of their lives because they were doing it at the time as well. And yeah, it doesn't matter how much you read about something or you could be an expert in any topic. If you're not experiencing at least a hint of something, you're not truly going to know and learn these things. And I had a similar experience too, and a tough time that I went through with my wife's health. And when I think back to that time, the most pivotal times were the times that I did decide to either just go up to the beach and watch the ocean, or I went out and my friends dragged me out to surf. Like those are the times that stand out because those are the positives. And yeah, just so inspiring to hear that. And thank you for sharing that story as well. Really beautiful to see the preaching put into practice.
Yeah, it is. And I think you bring up an important point that it's good to understand this for ourselves. And it's even better. We all know somebody who's in that place that's stuck, that's feeling gray mind. So when you go do your blue mind thing, get them. Somebody did that for you. Somebody did it for me. Return the favor and find that person that's in your community, maybe in your family. You know their name, you know where they live. You probably know what color the couch that they're glued to is. Just go get them, take them by the hand and say, I got you. I got an extra boogie board for you. I got an extra set of goggles. Like, we're going to go, I booked two float tanks and one for you, one for me, or whatever it is. Or I got an extra coffee. Let's go sit at the beach and watch the sunrise or the sunset, whatever it is. The plus one aspect is is part of how we build this movement and how we help each other. And we all know the names of those people, in our communities and our lives, and we all know what they're going through. And they may say no, like they're fine on the couch in the basement. They're not. Just make it happen. But that's a little reminder there.
We've become a society too of really priding ourselves on fending for yourself. And I think that's a really, really important piece of advice because even the people that might show on the outside that they have it all together, they could benefit from it. So yeah, we're all interconnected and we're all a family. And just because, we're in a civilized, advanced society doesn't mean that our emotional and mental health is any better ascended, if not worse, than other cultures and societies. So really good
Yeah.
reminder.
People tend to we're encouraged to check in with each other. Are you okay? How you doing? Yeah, bro, I'm fine. Great. But take it out of the text message thread and like, okay, good. I'm coming for you now. If you're okay, we're going outside. Sounds so simple, but society has just moved so indoors and into screens and into virtual, social activities that it's a radical act to say, let's go outside sometimes for some people. So needed. And we can all facilitate it in our own lives and lives of those around us.
Absolutely. So I want to circle back a bit to the benefit of water for children. And if you could share kind of some of the experience that you've seen developmentally or just in general, really, children getting in water. I know you talked about your experience with your own children too, but what are some specific things that getting kids in water from the earliest of ages, how does that really affect them as they grow older? And what benefits have you personally seen with that?
I think it's a simple reminder that, we all spent 9.21 months more or less underwater. That's how we all began. We don't remember a lot of the details generally about that time, but that's our shared reality. We're all swimming around in our own private ocean called mom. And then we come out into the bright lights, the air world, and it's very different. But when we get back to the water as kids, I can remember it very clearly as a kid. It felt like going home. I stuttered. I was introverted. I had big questions about, my origins because I was adopted. But in the water, I always felt like held and at home again. And that's real. That's not just a metaphor or a poem. It's quite real. And so if kids are neurodivergent, let's just say, and find water to feel like home, then that's amazing. Just, you need to facilitate that. But even just in general, play is good for neurological development and growth. We need to play. Kids need to play and not with a screen in their face. They need to play in 3 dimensions with a little bit of danger or unknown or unpredictability in the mix. And when you add water to play, it takes it up a level. So I like to say balloons are fun. Water balloons are a party. Slides are great. Water slides are epic. You get like, parks are nice. Water parks are, screaming joy. So, add water to the situation and the play factor goes exponential. And we know that. Like we know that as educators, and we know that as therapists, but you don't need to ask permission to do it, to bring kids to the water at every opportunity or bring water to the kids at every opportunity. People might say, well, they get wet and then their clothes are wet and then you got to clean up the puddles. Then, yep, cool. It dries fast. You can wipe up puddles easily. You can change clothes and dry them out, whatever. Go for it. Kick off the shoes and stomp in the puddle because that play aspect is so, so important to neurological development, to social emotional learning. And so that's a big part of it, just the whole play factor. And then you bring in the therapeutic benefits that kids need at various points in their lives and talk about it. I think that's the key thing. It's some mystery behind a screen. It's a therapeutic benefit. You should talk about it too. So kids, as they develop intellectually, kind of referred to that with my kids, they have the language to ask for it. They may have a friend and they need to say to their friend or their partner someday, hey, I got to go get some Blue Mind because I need it. And they have the language to ask for it and they can prioritize it as they get older. So providing those insights to kids as they grow and talking about it in that way. And I talk about it with my kids, like, "I gotta go get some Blue Mind," and they knew what I meant, and they knew why I needed it, and then they started to use the language and do it themselves, and, there are so many examples that I've seen, kids on the spectrum who are attracted to water and are safely encouraged and guided to spend time in water and derive just incredible benefits. There's this great movie called Rocco Up, and it's about this boy named Rocco. I encourage you to look it up, look up the website, look up the clips on social media. His parents raised him in Long Island, and his mom and dad are surfers, and they realized that their kid wasn't going to surf like them, but Rocco was going to surf like Rocco in his own way. And they'd go out, and Rocco got up on a board, and like the whole town cheered for it, for him and for the moment. And now they're using his methodology to help kids get in the water, not just surf, but get in pools and move their bodies, and with all the care and supervision and safety, of course. And then what we see in those cases are the benefits not just to the kid, but to the parents and the grandparents, because they get a break as well, and they get to feel that joy and pride and accomplishment. And if you're raising a kid that has special needs, it's exhausting, and any joy in that process is a gift. And so you see that in Rocco's story and so many others. I mentioned worked with a swim school that had kids coming in that were dealing with various challenges, physical, emotional challenges, and learning to swim with really good instructors, and then smiling underwater and having the GoPro video shared with the mom who got to see her kid smile for the first time in years. Not to mention that the doctors were astounded by the progress that the kids were making. And the only thing that was added was swim lesson to their lives. But their movement, their range of movement, their peace of mind, the lower stress supports the healing process. Stress and cortisol promote inflammation. Inflammation slows healing. Just kind of simple, logic chain there. But if you can reduce the stress and reduce the cortisol and reduce the inflammation, you can advance the healing process. So it's physiology 101 in a way, facilitated by, water-based activities. But yeah, truly the list goes on. There's a great book that a boy named Naoki Higashida wrote about autism and his experience with autism. And the story goes that he didn't like any of the other books about autism written by adults, so he wrote his own. They're just these little vignettes and essays, and he has one that's all about his experience of water, and he describes how he feels at peace and happy in the water in a way that he doesn't feel otherwise, and that he has a different sense of time and fewer physical distractions, mental distractions. And just hearing it through his voice makes it really clear. So if you do a quick search for Naoki Higashida, the reason I jump, and the phrase blue mind, you'll find that paragraph somewhere posted online. I excerpted a little bit of it in my book. But yeah, to your question and to the point there are just so many individual stories, and taken together, they amass into a pretty powerful clinical story that then we need to kind of figure out how to use it and how to help more kids, reconnect with water in all of its forms, and develop that lifelong relationship.
And on that point too, what are some practical ways for parents that are listeners? And we've already talked obviously about water and its benefits in all of its forms, so you don't necessarily need to live on a coast or near a large body of water to reap those benefits. But that's one of the things I really, really love in your book, how you talk about just the most simple things. And I'll let you kind of share a little bit about that, but stuff that's even in your own home that you could incorporate it. But for parents that are listening that aren't able to get their children in water or around water as often as they might like, what are some really basic practical recommendations you could give to them, and how often and how many minutes a day or whatever,
Yeah.
as basic of a recommendation as you could provide for that?
Yeah, I have this. this concept, I call it the blue scription, right? So I can give you a blue scription, you can give me a blue scription, and we right now can give a blue scription to everybody who's listening because it's all upside. And it basically is coming up with a map for yourself, for your own life, a plan to do Blue Mind daily for 23 minutes a day in some form. That if you do that 5 days a week, that amasses to 100 hours a year. And if you do it repeatedly, you build the habits, you build the knowledge, the relationship. And so you might be thinking, okay, I don't live near the ocean. How am I going to do that? Well, oceans, lakes, rivers, ponds, creeks, rain, waterfalls, that's all the wild water. If you pull out the map, no matter where you are, you're in the middle of Oklahoma, you can get to water. I promise you. Middle of Arizona, Alaska in the winter. It's frozen, but it's water. So just look at the map and figure that out. But then there's also the domestic water. So the water that's in your home, that's in your tub, that's in the pipes and the tubes and the showers, in the pools and the spas. So a public pool, a neighbor's pool. Maybe you're lucky and you have a pool or a hot tub of your own. Maybe there's one in your community that you can access, but that's domestic water. And that's kind of everywhere as well, at least in your bathroom. And so when the kids are little, the bathtub is like a lake. My kids had masks and snorkel and little fish floating around, and it was like scuba city in the bathtub, regular old bathtub. So you can do that as well. And bath time is, for that partly. It's for hygiene as well, but it's also for blue mind. The iPad, the smartphone doesn't like the bath very much. So you get the screen free time in the water. That's good. You get conversations. You get that skin to skin contact with the kid that you can see how they're doing. You can see how their skin is, how they are physically. There's that assessment aspect of a parent that is part of bath time. When the kids were little, real little, is just so much fun to get them both in the bathtub, and just the photos of those moments are just hilarious. And so that's a domestic aspect. So now you got your list of wild water, domestic water, and then there's the urban water. So that's the urban waterfronts, the walkways on the rivers that go through your town, the bridges, the fountains. So sitting by the fountain, playing in the fountain, having a conversation by the fountain, taking off your shoes and kicking your feet. Some fountains are built to be interactive. Some are not, but seeking out those interactive urban waters. That's another piece. So now you got 3 lists, and we're not even halfway through here. There's virtual water. So that's water in the form of artworks, through poetry, through books about water, through films, photography, a song about water, whether it's Jack Johnson singing about the ocean, or a kid's song, Rubber Ducky, or whatever the kids' music about water that your kids like. So you've got virtual water, wild water, urban water, domestic water, and then imaginary water. So those are the water-based memories. So you might be sitting inside, you can close your eyes and say, let's remember that trip we did to the beach last year, or let's remember our trip to the water park. Close your eyes. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it taste like? What does it smell like? Your imagination is always there. So you're carrying around all of those experiences. And then there's the embodied water, and that's all of nature that is made out of water, including ourselves. So the forest is water. It's made of water. The squirrels and the fish are made of water. The birds are made of water. The trees and the grass and the plants, they're all made of water. The food we eat is made of water. Our own bodies are made of water. So engaging with the green parts of nature that are made out of water is still part of Blue Mind. So now you've got these 7 categories. And the last one that I didn't mention is the metaphoric water. So that's the language about water. And depending on how old your kids are and how much they're into language, you can play around with that. There's so many water metaphors in our language. Water and fire probably are the greatest sources of metaphor. Go with the flow, or float down the river, or surf the internet. And it's fun to just play with the language and the words. And that language conjures up, you know, some mild blue mind benefits. So we're not comparing, say, a water poem to sitting next to the Pacific Ocean. Those aren't the same thing. One is much more powerful, you might say, much more convincingly blue mind, and one is much more subtle. But when you make your list of the ways you can practice blue mind in the life that you're living with your interests and your geographical realities, I promise you'll end up with your own amazing list of practices. And then engaging with that daily in some form isn't a challenge. You don't need to save up to do a tropical vacation or a river trip or some big expedition, although you can do that as well. Like that's a good goal. You can practice blue mind where you are, as you are, every single day. So I like walking through that as an exercise, sometimes with a group of people and some paper. And what we end up with is a very bespoke, personal blue scription that makes sense in your life. And if people need to rewind this part and go back and listen to that again and get out a piece of paper and actually do the exercise, and then circle the things that really pop out and seem like they're most accessible, and then put a square or check mark around the ones that might be more of a reach, that need a little more planning or more resources. And then set out with your family to do Blue Mind in some form every day. And, at night we put on the sound of waves or the sound of a river or the sound of rain in our home, just instead of the sound of a TV or news or a sports show. We put on the sound of water, and it just kind of calms everything. And for that hour, we're practicing Blue Mind with virtual water in in a built environment, and it helps us sleep, and it's free. There's little free recordings on YouTube. You just hit play and off you go. So, that works. You don't have to fall asleep to the sound of the Pacific Ocean every night because you can't always live that close, or most people don't. So I think weaving it all in, coming up with your own blue scription, building the habit, making it a fun part of your life. And the reminder is water is not a niche topic. It is the foundation of all life on earth. It's the opposite of a niche. It's the opposite of an obscure idea. Maybe this is one of the biggest ideas that humanity has ever had, that water is good for our emotional well-being. So it behooves us all to create a personal blue scription for ourselves, for our families, to extend that offer, that exercise to the people you know. If you work in a service career or you're in a leadership position, you can take that simple exercise and do it with your team, do it in a classroom, do it with your clients, and find that story that works for each of us. And I like to say, practice it 23 minutes a day, 5 days a week. That ends up being 100 hours. I like the number 23 because the 23rd letter of the alphabet is W for water and wellness and wonder. So it's just a little bit quirky and maybe memorable to kind of make it a prime number 23 rather than just a boring even 20.
Yeah, and I love the way that you lay it out to the blue scription because it's so accessible for everybody. Like you said, water is the foundation of absolutely everything. And somebody that's listening right now, there is without a doubt a way for them to utilize at least one of them in today's world, regardless of your circumstance and your situation. So really appreciated sharing that. And I also think coming from that and making that change to really incorporate that in your life will lead to such an increase in environmental awareness and the care for water. And obviously, your goal of what you're doing is the more people are going to do that, the more there's going to be a respect for nature and there's going to be less inclination to level the rainforests versus, keep them up because maybe it doesn't matter to have this luxury housing here and do all of this because we've all experienced that. So, absolutely beautifully put. And I think practically implementable for anybody. And yeah, I really appreciate that. I have one final question. I know I think you mentioned it before about like that's the piece of practical parenting advice you would leave for any parent listening. But I do ask every guest at the end of the show. So even if you want to recap that, whatever works for you. But if you could offer just one piece of advice to leave listeners with, whether it's a practical parenting tip or a holistic self improvement tip, whatever it might be, what would that be and why?
I remember when I wrote Blue Mind a decade ago, got to the end of a very long multi-year writing, editing process, and I wrote the last paragraph of the book. And I started out and I wrote, all I really want to say is this, dot, dot, dot. And that was at the top of the page. And then I just sat there and stared at the screen and I was like, what I've written 300 words. There's 40 pages of citations. There's years have gone into this, interviews and research. What do I really want to say? Like, what's the point of this anyway? There's a lot of words, a lot of ideas, but really like as cogent as possible. And I wrote, get in the water. And that was the end of the sentence. And then I kind of unpacked it a bit, like float on it, swim in it, dive into it, drink a big glass, make it part of you, and be part of it. But that really, that simple idea, get in the water. And if it's metaphoric water or if it's virtual water, if it's a water song, get into it, sing that water song, belt it out, make one up if you have to, write a water song, write a water poem, get into the snow, get into the rain, just get into it. And when in doubt, whatever the situation is, as and we're speaking to parents here, when in doubt, get in the water. Take your kid and get in the water. Whatever it is, whatever's coming at you, you won't regret it. You'll come back happier, healthier, more connected to your kid, smiling, most likely. Never heard anybody say, yeah, I went to the beach and I came back and man, I was extra sad. I mean, if you get like step on a stingray or something, or, cut your foot on glass, that's a whole other scenario, but nobody regrets practicing Blue Mind almost ever. So it's simple. It's almost so simple. It's ignorable or forgettable, or we just go, yeah, yeah, yeah. But just have that little mantra in the back of your mind. Like when something seems a little more challenging or difficult, you don't know what to do, get in the water in whatever form and take your kid with you.
I love it. One of the things that I love, and I think it's your email signature, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you say, I wish you water,
Yeah.
right? Yep. I love that. I
That's
love
always how I sign the book. And that's that's really the last bit. That's the last line of the book. And it's actually the first line in the dedication as well. So that it's a nice salutation. I think wishing somebody water is, in fact, wishing them more than just water. It's all of what Blue Mind brings you is what you're wishing them. And it's health and wellness and joy and romance and connectedness and compassion and calmness. And that's what you're wishing with that simple salutation. Cuts right through, a lot of the BS in the world right now that divides us. The water doesn't care. It doesn't divide us. It unites us. It unites not just us humans, but every living thing, and every element in the universe is in that water. So the world can use a little more of that vibe, these days as well, a little more unification, a little more connection, and in the literal sense. So that wish of water implies kind of all of that.
Perfectly said. Simple, but genius and deep on so many levels.
Okay.
Well, it's been an honor and a privilege, and I had a really, really awesome time connecting with you today. And again, I really appreciate you making the time in your busy schedule as well. And yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you again.
Yeah, likewise. You enjoyed it. Appreciate the invite.
All right. To all the listeners, we wish you love. We wish you water, more importantly. And we will see you on next week's episode. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, please subscribe, leave a review, and share the show with a friend. Inside the Tide is now streaming on all podcast platforms and YouTube, and links to the social media pages can be found in the show notes below. I mentioned it last week, but I'll soon be publishing my first book that provides parents more in-depth content on why nature is important for your kids, along with almost 50 activities that you could perform with your children in different outdoor settings. It'll be available for purchase on Amazon, and I'll be putting the pre-order link and announcing the launch date on my social media pages soon, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. And that's about everything. Appreciate every single one of you guys for tuning in today and taking the time to listen. I will see you on next week's episode.